And it's also why these films, we've made 3 of them, have been such a delight, because we are an ensemble. And it's true that Hugh Jackman and Halle Berry have kind of emerged as the 2 marquee names from all of this. And it has nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that some mornings, walking into the X-Men makeup trailer, I could go along a row of actresses saying, "Good morning, Halle. Good morning, Fanta. Good morning." Anna Paquin and Kelly Yu, and it just, that had no bearing on it whatsoever.
Watching that clip there made me wonder if there was something else that had a bearing, or at least an interest in the part for you. When Charles Xavier says it's his, was it School for Gifted? I think he says. Was there a, not maybe quite political element, but certainly an element of it that X-Men was about protecting outsiders to society, protecting the vulnerable, and that yourself, through your own political leanings, things that you've done with Amnesty International and aspects of domestic abuse, whatever, you were drawn to this idea of what Charles Xavier is doing for these people who are different and vulnerable in society.
That was a happy accident, that part of it. That the fundamental philosophy behind Charles Xavier's school and work and the creation of the X-Men, as opposed to his nemesis Magneto, played by Sir Ian McKellen, with whom I've spent most of last year sharing the stage. There was the fundamental belief that difference is to be embraced, and it is not something to be afraid of. That individuality in so many different forms is one of the great joys of this world, and it should be celebrated. That was Charles Xavier's philosophy. It happens to be mine, and it happens to coincide with how I feel about Amnesty International and prisoners of conscience, and also how I feel about domestic violence, of the secret horror that so many people lead their lives in. And it was why Star Trek happened to be such a happy relationship for me, because although Gene Roddenberry was not a political man and resisted attempts to politicize Star Trek, although when Gene died far too soon, far too early in this great success that he had with Next Generation, I think halfway through the 3rd of 7 seasons, we then were able, under the leadership of Rick Berman, to nudge some storylines into a rather more overt political direction, and that made me really happy. I remember Whoopi Goldberg and myself worked together a lot on a script which was about somebody had arrived on the Enterprise and they were going to take Data, the android, back to Earth, where they were going to reproduce him in millions. And he didn't want to go, and we didn't want to lose him, and a trial was set up in which the defense that we presented, and Whoopi Goldberg played a great part in this, was that what was being proposed was a form of slavery, and that Data was in fact as sentient a being as it was possible to be. So it was a happy accident to find myself for 7 years in a series that was dealing seriously with issues like that. And, well, it's common knowledge that my close association with the Labour Party and what Labour has stood for in terms of fairness and equality has always been of huge importance to me and continues to be.
I thought what we'd do now, and this might be as interesting for you as it is for everyone else, is to wind back the years somewhat and look at something that's from a much earlier part of your career, and tapping into that. This isn't Shakespeare, this isn't classical theatre, but it has a certain classical nature to it. This is a clip from the 1976 TV series of I, Claudius. I, Claudius was such a seminal piece of television at the time. And what are your memories of making it and of the exposure that that part gave you in your career?
It was the first important role I had on television. Herbert Wise, who directed I, Claudius, he had created within the BBC a kind of Herbie Wise rep company. He tended to use the same actors, and I had played a very, very small role in something for Herbie, and then he gave me this role, and of course, I, Claudius was the launch pad for a number of careers, most notably Derek Jacobi, who was well known to those who went to the National Theatre, but probably not known elsewhere. This made him an international star. John Hurt, who played the unspeakable Caligula in this series and was so brilliant. Again, that gave him a public platform. And I was only in for the 13 episodes, and the character I played was a contemptible, despicable, miserable beast of a character, for all that smiling and smarmy voice. But I remember soon after this had been released, I went on a trip to see friends in San Francisco, and I was walking across San Francisco airport, and this was the very first time anything like this ever happened to me, and I suddenly heard somebody yell out, "Oh my God, it's Sir Janus." Now that's unimaginable, particularly given that extraordinary head of hair that is in that series. And but I wasn't comfortable. I mean, I look at that and frankly, I squirm. However, I do want to draw your attention to the wonderful Stratford Johns, who played the senator, and of course Stratford at that time was most famous for having played the inspector in Z-Cast, and made a huge name for himself. And my good childhood friend, the boy that I grew up with and did my first amateur acting with, was also in that series, one Brian Blessed, who was appearing as part of the World Cup this afternoon. Probably you saw him. But that makes me uncomfortable.
Well, to get to that point and that national television exposure, what training had you had? How had your childhood given you a taste for theatre? I believe your mother was in an amateur dramatics company. What was it sparked the interest in the training that you did to get to that point?
Good research. Yes, my mother was. I grew up in a small town in the West Riding, a mill town in the West Riding, just on the shadow of the Pennines, and the town had a population of 11,000, and we had 13 fully functioning drama societies. Now, that meant that they maybe only did one pantomime a year, or one Gilbert and Sullivan a year, but nevertheless, the groups came together, so it was not unusual in my community to be a performer. What was unusual was to take it up as a profession. That was unheard of. My brother, who was very handsome and had a good singing voice, played the leads in the church pantomimes, where I was also a choir boy. But my mother was the first member of my family I saw act, and I learned in my early 20s, just before my grandmother died, that there was a predecessor, that my grandfather, whom I never met, because he abandoned his wife and her 4 children, one of them being my father, abandoned them and ran away. He was always believed to America. The last time he was ever seen in the UK, in England, he was appearing on stage in a play at the Elephant and Castle Theatre, London, which no longer exists now. And when the police found him and went to arrest him, as you could be arrested in those days for non-payment of support of his family, and my grandmother told me that he persuaded the police to let him finish the play. He had one more scene to do, and they agreed, so he went on stage, he finished the scene, he went off the other side of the stage and was never seen again.